The history of the world. Part 2. Liberating and setting free common sense and a real scientific method. With any look at history, unless the environmental conditions are also known about, then trying to gauge and understand why different events happened is severely restricted. So when trying to understand the past, any events, big or small, must be seen in light of the environmental conditions around at any given time, as they have not been as stable as we've been led to believe, with it massively affecting life on Earth, and indeed the Earth itself. For instance, during the medieval warm period, all the great Gothic cathedrals were built in Europe. And during the Viking warm period, they farmed Greenland for about 500 years. Also, during the Roman warm period, we even had vineyards on the Scottish borders with England, until it started getting cold again, with the Romans then going home. And like the warmer periods, we also got the colder ones too, like during the Maunder Minimum in the 1600s, when at times during the winter months, all the rivers and canals froze over, with frost fairs taking place on the River Thames in London. Our weather is driven electrically, and that electrical input comes from our sun, which means we are part of the sun's electrical circuit. And as we have seen in part 1, electromagnetism does change things very, very quickly. As the weather changed in the 1600s, with it getting colder, there was a lot of unrest and hard times, with everyone looking for someone individually or as a group to blame. Some of the problems during this time frame included the plague breaking out across Europe, while in England there was the gunpowder plot, in which aimed to get rid of Parliament by blowing it up. During that century there was also the English Civil War, with the Roundheads fighting the Royalists, and with Charles I then losing his head. Plus, on a local level, there was also the burning of witches. Back in those times, politics and religion were the same thing, with it meaning that any problems in the ground were quickly related to how I felt. With this meaning that God was showing his displeasure in their eyes by increasingly making the weather unstable and extreme. And with some, like the self-styled witchfinder general, for a time making a very tidy living out of the fear of a natural climate change. In scientific terms, this was the time of the grand solar minimum, a natural electrical cycle coming from the sun, with it roughly having a 100-year cycle of the cooler times, within the much more extreme 400-year cycle, like with the Maunder Minimum. So we can't look at history, whether in the affairs of man or that of the Earth as a whole, without taking into account our changing electrical environment as well. This means that our sun is our climate, and the Earth has weather.
You are all of you confessed idolaters. However, these proceedings shall be carried out through due process of law. What law demands, we shall satisfy. You will each be tied in a prescribed fashion and cast into the moat. Should you then sink, we will know that your confessions are false. If, on the other hand, you are seen to swim or float, then your confessions of witchcraft are proven beyond a doubt in the sight of God, and you will be withdrawn from the water and hanged by the neck until you are dead.
In these more modern times, we might have hoped for a more enlightened approach to those thinking outside of the mainstream box, and so reject any religious doctrine and tenet, be that a traditional religion or indeed a pseudo one. And although these days people on the whole do not resort to burning people to death, as well as using other horrors, anyone who dares go against what is just agreed to be right by those in charge, they will be persecuted. So even though, and since the Sapphire project was first conceived, with even the proof of concept model being first turned on just 7 years ago, with it working as soon as the switch was flipped, we have now reached a point where Phase 3 is being designed and going into operation, with the building of a clean and cheap energy production plasma medium heat reactor. But who in the mainstream science, or even the mainstream media, has ever told of it during the last 7 years or so? And even though they have been told of the project many times themselves over the years. But in spite of the silence by the mainstream, with them trying to sweep it under the carpet and being locked into the past, the future is already here.
How does sapphire work? We introduce hydrogen into the chamber. The anode is a metal alloy. The power going in is electrical. The reaction at the core generates heat. The heat creates steam to run a turbine to generate electricity. The hydrogen can be captured and reused. The output is electricity, the majority going to an external grid. Any surplus can be routed back to the power input. To date, after the reactions, all measurements and analysis show this to be a clean process, producing no negative radioactive side effects. In fact, note that nuclear radioactive materials are not required. Sapphire is mixing elements at the atomic level. What you are looking at is a patented design that uses atomic hydrogen in a self-organized plasma. The atomic hydrogen interacts with the other elements in the chamber, causing nuclear reactions that are transmuting elements from one to another. And these are the elements that sapphire produced as a consequence of the nuclear reactions. So far. What you are looking at here is an experiment run over several hours. We were adjusting the chemistry to get different results, the aim being to explore higher energy levels. On this day, the rise in temperature over time was what we were intending, and yet it still exceeded our expectations. 3 separate analyses have been done by experts in computational fluid dynamics. All 3 predicted that with 100% input power, we would reach the thermal limit of the chamber. And for 3 years, these predictions had been accurate. But with our new adjustments and using only 7% input power, we very quickly reached the thermal limit. It was the elemental transmutations that were responsible for the rise in temperature over time. That was almost 14 times what was predicted.
Due to sapphire being such a success, due to it being modelled on an electric solar atmosphere and not guesswork, even the proof of concept model obtained output surges of up to and over 10 million watts DC, and with only 1800 watts DC going in. So it is now causing many headaches to those who were fooled into thinking that the failed standard model was the only model to believe in. With this being mainly due to them being experts in mathematical guesswork only and not empirical science. And because mainstream science has been told to only explore the gravity collision model, they then automatically try and dismiss any other evidence, and even if it is empirical, like the Sapphire project. So even though we now don't burn witches, those who do dare to think outside the pseudo-religion of scientists' doctrine tenet, they will still get verbally roasted and then be outlawed from the mainstream science.
the tokamak and ITER reactors draw many millions of watts of power in an attempt to contain collisional plasmas to obtain fusion. At a cost of billions of dollars, huge international projects have been trying to contain plasmas, utilizing vast arrays of superconducting magnets. So far, this has been unsuccessful. Fission reactors split the atom, and although they have an efficiency of around 35%, they also produce radioactive waste. This radioactive waste is being buried in the ground or stored in facilities at enormous expense. None of it is benign. Some of it is still deadly, even after a half-life of over 1 million years. How is sapphire different? Leonard, cold fusion, and all existing fission reactors are low or low-medium temperature nuclear reactors. They require specially prepared solid fuels, which are expensive, and, in the case of fission reactors, often dangerously radioactive. Fission reactors are relatively safe, stable, but they produce radioactive spent fuel, which is extremely problematic and not safe. Fusion reactors are high-temperature reactors. They also require some form of radioactive fuel, and so far, they are inherently unstable and not yet producing electricity. Sapphire is a medium-temperature plasma reactor, currently producing a controllable stable plasma, which can be generated at will and run continuously over extended periods of time. Sapphire produces no environmentally dangerous or detrimental side effects. Self-organizing systems are a natural process occurring throughout nature. Sapphire forms its own electromagnetic containment field into a self-organizing plasma. It uses hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. Out of the 11 most abundant inorganic elements found in the interstellar medium, 9 were also found in the sapphire reactor chamber after an experiment. They were not there before the experiment.
And then we have carbon with barium, titanium, zinc, chromium.
Once it was obvious transmutation was occurring, the sapphire team began to discover other uses for the technology.
And lanthanum and cerium.
All things you wouldn't expect to see.
2 of the transmuted elements found in the sapphire chamber are lanthanum and cerium, both of which are considered rare earth elements.
So as well as producing electrical power, sapphire is now being further developed into other areas too, like the production of the rare earth elements, as well as
studies done at MIT have shown that when radioactive waste is exposed to hydrogen isotope nuclei, the decay rate of the radioactive material can be accelerated, even to the point of neutralizing the radioactivity. Sapphire creates an environment where hydrogen nuclei interact with other elements, creating double-layer shells. Within these shells, electrons, ions, and molecules are trapped by powerful electromagnetic fields. It is in this environment where radioactive material would be exposed to the hydrogen nuclei to remediate the radioactivity of that material. Sapphire is an international team, working with consultants from Lockheed Martin, US DoD, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore Labs, Space Propulsion Consultants, the University of Toronto, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, and more. Upgrades are made to the sapphire chamber.
Gas vacuum panel. All closed.
About -1 bar on the analog gauge.
-1 bar.
Check.
Check.
Refinements are made to the protocols, procedures, and instrument calibration.
Check.
Check.
On panel vacuum control.
This improves control and shortens the time between experiments.
Sensitive gas.
The checklist for starting up Sapphire cycles through 100 essential points.
Check. Mass flow control is off. All the valves are closed. Filters are off.
Running the Sapphire reactor is like flying a 747 jet airliner.
Check.
Check.
Again, I can do the step and glue, so it's just like say from 500 nanometers on up to 700, because it'll collect the data a lot faster.
Yeah, and we'll get more of an IR signature.
Yes, get some power into that with this new chemistry. Just bring it right down. Just open the valve. 860. How many watts you got?
What are those? What are those? Poppy, what are those lines?
There we go.
520, 520.
There we go. Now we're getting sunlight. Now we're getting there. Are those the gold lines?
Repeated testing yields results that accurately mirror previous experiments. The same type of tests yield the same type of results.
With the Sapphire project being born out of an electric sun model, and so an electric universe, it means that its success is down to years of observation and data collection to start with Christian Berkeley first suggested an electric connection to the Northern Islands around the 1900s. So now it's being realised by many that we can't begin to understand the world's history unless early 20th century guesswork is discounted, and with it returning us to a proper forensic approach. Sherlock Holmes would have loved the electric universe if Sir Arthur Conan Doyle knew about it back when writing about the detective. Due to being conceived from a forensic point of view, and so not using the guess first method as used in the standard model. Since the Sapphire project was conceived, and then with the proof of concept being first turned on, and with it working as soon as the switch was split, we have now reached a point where the primary function, energy production, is going into operation, with the building of a clean and cheap energy production medium heat plasma reactor. So, when we look first, rather than just guessing, we can actually learn from the history of the past, and with it, having the future look very bright indeed, and as bright as the electrically arcing sunlight gives us life. So it's our understanding and continued use of electricity developed during the 20th century and outside of guesswork that has made the world we live in today. With it lighting, heating and generally powering our modern world. Due to Sapphire being such a success, with even the proof of concept model obtaining output surges of up to and over 10 million watts DC, and with only 1800 watts DC going in, with the proof of concept model, it is now causing much confusion to those who seem to have been soft hypnotized into not knowing the difference between real science and fudged math guesswork. Many, when talking of the most famous equation in history, E equals mc squared, they often talk of the c in the equation being the speed of light. But what many fail to consider or even realise, it is actually the speed of electromagnetism, with the visible to human wavelengths of the radiation, or what we know of as light, being just a tiny part. Also, it is not widely taught where the Einsteins, man and wife, dreamed up this equation, and of course they didn't, as they just shortened it from slightly longer existing electromagnetic equations. And in doing so, they changed mass to matter, and so removed the electromagnetic component in the equation, or so they thought, with the result being, in their minds, that we existed in a universe full of objects that were completely separated from each other. And this was, and still is, woefully wrong, as the universe has now been proved to be full of charged particles, and so is electromagnetic in nature. By doing this, they completely ignored the fact that the electromagnetic spectrum is a transverse wave, and actually slow compared to the speed of a longitudinal wave, and which has the speed of about here to the other side of the Andromeda Galaxy in 1 second. One of the misconceptions with Einstein's interpretation of E equals mc squared is the thought that energy can be converted into matter and back again, when it actually means that the mass, second half of the equation, is equal to the energy it has locked up within the mass. So more mass will be equal to the more energy it holds. This mistake has been widely used in science fiction, and who don't understand the original meaning of the equation, like with Star Trek, where they simply beam people about. And of course, with them also using from the collision gravity model, the idea of being able to warp space to get around the galaxy quickly. And even though they still also believe that nothing can travel faster than the speed of electromagnetism. When an atomic bomb explodes, the eternal energy is released from the atoms, but the atoms of the bomb don't actually vanish. They instead become the fallout, which of course can still be observed as nuclear pollution. And so no, matter and energy are not interchangeable, with the equation not leading to that conclusion, as the equation is a way to calculate the energy within the mass that makes up the matter.
In an electric universe, nowhere can one find a, quote, island in space. Across vast cosmic distances, electric currents flow through the conductive medium of plasma, electromagnetically pinching gas and dust to form stars and planets. The NASA missions Juno and Cassini to Jupiter and Saturn, respectively, have provided data that could shake planetary science to its core. The discoveries dramatically highlight the failures of standard theory versus the successful predictions of the electric universe. We begin an exploration of the Juno discoveries, which, in the words of NASA investigators, have proved that scientists' fundamental ideas about the Jovian atmosphere were, quote, totally wrong. One of the greatest surprises the team first reported was that Jupiter's magnetic field, which was already thought to be tremendously powerful, is twice as strong as previously believed. The turbulent Jovian atmosphere has also proved, quote, mind-boggling, with rapidly changing cyclones at the planet's poles proving far more dramatic and, quote, weird than investigators had imagined. As Juno principal investigator Scott Bolton stated, "Had someone shown me a picture of the pole just 10 years ago, I never would have guessed it was Jupiter. Scientists' estimates of the planet's internal structure have proved equally troubling." Scott Bolton states in a January 10, 2018 article on space.com, "Our ideas were totally wrong about the interior structure, about the atmosphere, and even about the magnetosphere." The article continues, "Astronomers believe that Jupiter had either a very small and dense core, or perhaps no core at all. But data from Juno revealed that Jupiter has an enormous, quote, fuzzy core that might be partially dissolved. This discrepancy between scientists' expectations and the data suggests that there's a lot we still don't know about giant gas planets," Bolton explained. A critical clue to the missing theoretical foundations for investigators is found in the following statement from the Space.com report. "Strangely, auroras on Jupiter seem to be powered by a mysterious physical force that astronomers haven't been able to identify. According to the mathematical calculations, Jupiter's auroras should be about 10 to 30 times more energetic than Earth's. But Jupiter has seen auroras that are hundreds of times stronger for no apparent reason." Scientists had long proposed that a kind of localized charge separation produced Jupiter's X-ray auroras in the planet's interaction with so-called volcanic plumes from its moons. That perspective was summarized as follows by NASA investigator Randy Gladstone. "The volcanic moon Io spews oxygen and sulfur ions into Jupiter's spinning magnetic field. Somehow, these ions make their way to Jupiter's poles, where electric fields send them hurtling toward the planet below. Upon entering the atmosphere, their electrons are first stripped away by molecules they run into, but as they slow down, they start grabbing electrons back. The quote, charge exchange reaction produces intense X-ray auroras. And here we see perhaps the fundamental source of countless surprises for space scientists at all scales throughout the cosmos. The belief that no celestial object can have a net electrical charge. But this antiquated perspective is now refuted. As reported in an October 2017 science blog by author Emily Underwood, entitled, "Can Large Electric Fields Power Jupiter's X-ray Auroras?" The data revealed particle signatures of parallel electrical fields over the poles of Jupiter that forced electrons near the poles upward, away from the planet, while protons and other ions moved downward into the atmosphere. This massive electric potential, upward of 1 million electron volts, provides a possible explanation of where the X-ray auroras get their energy, according to the authors. It's always been the electric universe position that the tremendously powerful Jovian auroras, the weird and turbulent polar storms, and the planet's tremendously powerful magnetic field are all ultimately induced by electrical Birkeland currents from the sun, focused at the planet's poles. As noted many times on this series, in recent years, retired professor of electrical engineering Dr. Donald Scott has developed a mathematical modeling of the structure of a Birkeland current, identified visually as counter-rotating cylinders, clearly seen in the earthly auroras, and dramatically at the poles of both Saturn, and as seen on your screen, in the at least 15 counter-rotating cylinders at the North Pole of Jupiter. A law of physics consistently stated on this series is that electric currents, and only electric currents, produce magnetic fields. Neither the Earth's nor any planet's magnetic field is produced through an internal dynamo, and all of the Juno data clearly supports this claim. Mission scientists acknowledge that all of the models which imagined a dynamo deep within the planet have been refuted, as reported by newscientist.com. A shock is that Jupiter's huge magnetic field is even stronger and much more irregular than expected. The irregularity of the field so far is a sign that the dynamo driving it may originate higher up in Jupiter's interior, perhaps from a layer of metallic hydrogen. Scott Bolton stated, "I didn't expect all the theories to be wrong, but there's motion going on in the planet we did not anticipate. But the quote, wrongness of all the standard theoretical predictions has not forced investigators to consider what electric universe proponents have always argued, that the source of Jupiter's magnetic field does not come from inside the planet at all, but rather it is induced by Birkeland currents, whose signature is clearly seen at the planet's poles." It's critical to note that according to recent scientific research by the Cassini mission at Saturn, the spacecraft's magnetometer had only been able to detect about 5% of the electric currents in the so-called plumes of the Saturnian moon Enceladus. According to data from Cassini's Langmuir probe, the electric currents may in fact exceed 10 million amps. Likewise, the electric current system at Jupiter is the real cause of the dramatic electrical discharges seen on the Jovian moon Io. In 1996, prior to the arrival of the Galileo probe at Io, physicist Wal Thornhill made a series of predictions, including the so-called plumes would be found to move across the surface of the moon. The quote, vents of the plumes would be vastly hotter than the expected temperatures of lava. And the plumes are in fact the jets of moving cathode arcs eroding the periphery of the dark areas that planetary geologists had been calling lava lakes. According to Thornhill, these so-called lava lakes are the solid dark surface of Io beneath the quote, snow that has been deposited by continuous discharge activity. Therefore, the quote, lava lakes would not reveal the heat of a recent lava flow. All of these predictions received stunning confirmation. Io's, quote, volcanic hotspots were not only hotter than any lava on Earth, they were too hot to be measured by Galileo's instruments.
Due to mainstream science not seeing what they guess to be reality, even NASA gets in on the fudging act, with them having to colour in the white holes in their own photographs, as well as the background, so to make the moon look volcanic.
Also as predicted by Thornhill, the discharging was focused on the edges of the so-called lava lakes, though the rest of these dark fields are comparatively cold. In fact, the expected volcanic vents were not found, inspiring further astonishment. The quote, volcanic plumes emit ultraviolet light, which is unthinkable under normal conditions of volcanic venting, but which of course is characteristic of an electric arc.
Electrical discharges have been detected on other planetary bodies as well, like Venus. When we look from a proper electrical perspective, science then really opens up. From the workings of the fundamental nature of separated charge in an atom, to the workings of galaxies and why they are even strung together through the cosmos. As electricity is fractal over many orders of magnitude, Burke currents of travelling electrical charge can be seen at different scales. On the smaller scale on Earth, these can be seen as a static shock from your hand to a door handle, or as a lightning phenomena through our atmosphere. End of part 2.